Okay, we're up and going with the College Prep English class for homeschoolers at EIE. Let's share the screen and we're off and going. So let's, any specific questions about the massive quantity of homework I've given you? Because I'm sure you've done it all, right? I see nodding, but okay. Let's look at our agenda. As always, we've got a link to the classroom feed. And we already started a little bit on one of the assignments from last week. We will continue with looking at those. Understand the following points. Understanding of the following points was assigned. I asked you to make sure to understand what sentence fragments and run-ons were, which I believe was chapter 5 in the book, and I'm sure you all looked at that. And what is a book report? You all have a link to our definition of what goes into a book report. Coordination and parallelism. That was one of the problems I saw in the projects for this week, and I thought it might be nice to understand what's going on there. Do you have any idea what we're talking about there?
Not coordination.
Okay, okay, very good. They're really the same thing, coordination, parallelism. We want to know both words for it. It's really a list of objects. Now, we can talk about a list of objects and their nouns. We can say, I have on the table A, B, C, and D. That's a list. But it doesn't have to be nouns. He walked into the room, strode up to the microphone, and poured syrup all over it. That's a series of what? What am I putting together there?
Actions.
They are actions. In fact, it's a set of verbs and, in fact, verb phrases. So we could easily have a string of verbs, or a string of nouns, or a string of adjectives. The strong, green, oddly smelling object entered the room. And we have all of these adjectives. You can put together a coordinated construct of any of these, but just don't mix them. You see what I mean? You can't mix verbs together with nouns. And we saw some problems in here. Also, if you've got verbs, you've got to make sure that all of those verbs are in the same form. You can't have some of them in a different tense, or some of them conjugated for a different person or something like that. Use of second person. Second person, you, tends to be a common usage in American colloquial usage, but it's really very out of place when you're trying to explain something. Use third person if you need an abstract something or other, then use one. You can also use they as long as you actually establish a noun to which they refers. You don't want to just throw out they without having it refer to anything. They always say, oh, that's so used so often, but you're not talking about who they are. As long as you've established it, then that works. Okay, and then again, an admonishment, please turn in assignments before Wednesday so that I can get a chance to look at them and get them all lined up so we can look at them here. Okay, we've got a number of debate topics that I thought it would be interesting to delve into, and a number of you wrote papers. Unfortunately, we don't really have anybody representing the opposing side on some of these. But let's see what we can do.
Who's that other student?
I beg your pardon?
Who's the other student that?
Dawson.
No, not Dawson.
Ezra.
Oh,
Yeah, Ezra. Yeah, wasn't he?
Oh, Ezra, I was
representing
told
the
last week
English
that he's not going to be here this week, and I never know when Dawson is going to come. I'm sure he'd have some interesting things to throw in. Okay, I have, in response to the things you handed in, I gave you a bunch of other material on both sides of the drug issue. Did you get a chance to look at those at all?
No.
I had already given you one, and you've seen that before. That was Peter Hitchens talking about the dangers. And specifically, again, these were anecdotal evidence that there are significant long-term effects that people can suffer from, or at least there are one or two examples that can be cited. And again, it's hard to know without a serious study. So his contention is that indeed, we don't even have a war against drugs. We're not waging it intelligently, we're not waging it consistently, and so it's not really having any effect. His brother, Christopher Hitchens, who was one of the great orators of the century, takes the other side on that one. However, I discovered that although those two brothers disagree on almost everything, they both agree on anti-gun control. So I had to really look around to try to find somebody on the other side of that issue. Good afternoon. It hasn't gone out yet, but that's why I was asking whether you had more information you wanted to.
Not particularly.
Okay, I'll go ahead and do it then.
Great. Thank you so much.
No problem. Sorry about that.
No.
You're welcome to join us if you feel like it.
I had to go practice. So
Okay.
thank you.
Okay, let's go back and do the rest of the projects, and then we will come up and look at this. One of the ones that I really would like you to look at and listen to is this one here, David Berlinski.
Yes.
Did you all watch that?
Yes, and I took great mental notes on that one.
You did what?
I took great mental notes.
Excellent mental notes, but you
Yeah.
didn't write them down to share them with us.
I can recite them.
I think that would be an absolutely stellar thing to do. I'll tell you what, you think about it for a while we do some other things, then we'll come back. Wonderful. One of the things you'll notice about Berlinski is his language. He's absolutely, it's very hard to imagine anybody better. And so, of course, it was natural that somebody decided to put together a debate between Berlinski and Hitchens.
Oh.
And they did. Unfortunately, Berlinski and Hitchens were really on such different sides of this issue and weren't really even talking about the same issue. So they sort of missed each other altogether with their barbs. But it's an interesting one to look at. Unfortunately, Hitchens was seriously suffering from chemotherapy at the time and was not really on top of his game. But it's fascinating when you see that kind of erudition, that kind of articulacy in the same room. Okay, let's go over here. Nicholas, okay, we've got.
And I did read it out loud.
Excellent.
I found lots of stuff that I read it out loud.
Okay, I tell you what, when we go through it, I will find some parts and ask you to read them out loud and see how they sound to you. Okay, so good work, one project. This is a guide to gun laws. Muslim problems could be solved by reading aloud. We will see whether that's true or not. Try to avoid using the word people if at all possible. Watch for homonym mistakes. Bear, for example.
Yeah, after I'd submitted it, I read it over one more time, and I found this weird weather. Instead of saying weather, I said weather as in the storm.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
I missed that, did I? Okay. I don't remember it.
Right there.
Absolutely. Good for you. Excellent. That is indeed a problem. Okay, very good. Synesis. I haven't really talked in here about synesis. Does anybody have any clue what it means? If you looked at it in your editor, you'd probably notice that your spell checker probably doesn't know what it is either. Synesis is a specific non-error. I call it a non-error because you will find it consistently made by some of the some of the best practitioners of the English language. Nonetheless, it's logically wrong. An example of synesis would be the students came into, the student, let me see if I can get this one straight. If you had an injunction, an order, everyone in this class is to have their pencil handy. That is an example of it. The problem is it's an awkward situation. Do you see where the problem is?
Yes.
Everyone should have their pencil handy. What is the alternative? Everyone should have his pencil handy.
You have
Everybody?
a pencil.
Everybody should have his pencil handy. That doesn't help anything.
A pencil.
Well, the question is the there, because there is plural and one is singular. So everyone should have his pencil handy. That's sexist. Everyone should have his or her pencil handy. That's just awkward. Okay, everyone should have their pencil handy is synesis. It's a mismatch of number. And but it's used so often because there aren't really any good alternatives for it. So you'll hear it used consistently, but it's definitely a logical error. And so you want to be aware of it and try to figure out another way around it. One of the easy ways around it is make everything plural. All students should have their pencils handy. Okay, let's look into this one. Second Amendment states that the people, indeed, the people in the Constitution is a word that's used consistently, so probably it would be perfectly acceptable there. But citizens, denizens, I thought were better. To bear arms. Notice that to bear arms makes perfect sense, but it means something totally different.
Yes, I didn't catch that.
Okay, and let's see how the synesis one works. Stories keep popping up. One, the news, that's what I missed too, about a teenager shooting his best friend or a mentally ill person killing their family. Okay, and you see how synesis happens there. Killing his or her family is the only way I could think of getting around that one. This easily could be prevented. This could easily be prevented just sounds so much easier to me. Okay, last or lastly, pretty much have to have a comma there. We have to eliminate these gun-free zones. These gun-free zones, having established it, you probably don't need to say it again. They are ineffective, inadequate, inimical. Now, inimical is a good word, but really not the right word here. What does inimical mean?
Pointless? Well, it's a sin.
Inimical means having the qualities of an enemy, adversarial.
Really?
Yes.
Oh.
It's a really good word.
When I searched it up, I got something else. Let me try to hide it.
Oh, let's just see. It's a nice word to have handy. Injurious or harmful in effect, adverse, unfriendly, hostile. Okay, so injurious, perhaps we could call it injurious. You might be able to make a case for it there. But you have a number of good words being used here, which is wonderful. Ineffective, inadequate. I suggested ill-conceived, self-defeating, and utterly pointless. Very good. They don't help the ridiculous crisis. Well, what do we mean by help the crisis? Improve the crisis?
Yes.
Or defend against the crisis. So I suggested here to mitigate the ridiculous crisis. That would be to reduce its severity, if that makes sense. So I think mitigate is a little better. the crisis on whether or not guns should be banned. Well, do we have a crisis on whether they should be banned, or simply a crisis about whether they should be banned, concerning whether they should be banned? I think something better than on would work, and I'm not sure we need anything at all. But I suggested this ridiculous crisis, nor help determine whether or not guns should be banned. Okay, just suggestions. There are dozens of different ways that could have been improved. A Second Amendment really that important? Yes, it is. The Second Amendment protects the right of an individual. Individual's right is perfectly good. It's just a little awkward to say. The right of an individual to live in a governed nation without tyranny, being bestowed, bestowed or imposed upon that individual. Bestow is a wonderful word, but what does bestow mean? Bestow generally means to grant something, as in grant a privilege or an award, bestowed an award upon someone. You don't usually bestow something negative on someone. And so I thought it would be more appropriate to inflict it upon. Inflict is something you always use in a negative form. I'm going to inflict upon you this award. You see what I mean? So you just want to hunt around and see if you can find the right word. It's also critical for self-defense. If an individual's life, and here we have a possessive, so we need the apostrophe, is at risk, they, notice, and an individual's life is singular, they is plural. We've got a synonym problem again. They know that they can defend themselves, or if citizens are at risk, they, that works better. Okay, gun-free zones is a joke. In the time that we live in, that's a little awkward. Got too many ins there. The time in which we live, making it where no one can purchase a firearm. Now, do you see why that one doesn't work? Making it where no one can purchase a firearm. This is one of those uses of where that really doesn't work, because we're not talking spatial relationships. We're speaking in a very colloquial, very informal and very imprecise language when we say that. So preventing the purchase of a firearm. Do you see how that sounds better and works? Okay. Make is a very, very generic term. It's nicer to use something that's more specific to what you're talking about. Make can be used for everything. The foolishness of these gun zones is rendering the law-abiding citizen incapable of defending him or herself. The word render is exactly the right word for that context.
I'm just curious, him or herself, that's not awkward in that sense, because I was thinking about renting it, but then I thought, oh, one side.
You are absolutely right. It is awkward, but there isn't anything better.
Really?
That's why synesis is sort of a non-error, because defending their self would be nice and comfortable. A lot of people would say it, but that would break the synesis rule. Okay, gargantuous. I couldn't find it anywhere.
It means
it's
very big. It's a synonym of gigantic, heavy, colossal.
Very good. It's nice to have an array
Go
like
to Google.com and just search it. You can do that right now. Search it and you'll find it.
Okay, I don't doubt you. I just couldn't find it in my dictionary. And so gargantuous, if you really want it, then by all means. Okay.
Because I was thinking, what would be better than gargantuous? No one ever
Gargantuan,
uses that word.
I think would work, but okay. These checks will whittle out. I don't object to whittle out. I think that's a clever way to do it. Eliminate is perhaps a little more generic, but that's fine. The purpose of this paragraph is unclear. The checks will allow the responsible people to exercise their Second Amendment rights.
It's about background checks versus good and bad people, because you could have a good person who's irresponsible with their firearms and someone around them could get hurt. So it's responsible people versus irresponsible.
No, it could use a little clarification, but I think I could see what you were trying to say, but you might try it a little harder to say. Okay, let's see. Criminals know they can get away with owning guns illegally. I added the using there just because I thought it made sense. Without the worry of being shot, criminals may use guns as they please in these gun-free zones. Again, it's not really clear exactly where you're going with that. I know what you mean. You mean the criminal can be confident that he or she is not going to encounter a gun in a gun-free zone and is therefore free to run amok.
Because criminals have been interviewed, and if they want to commit a crime, they would go to a gun-free zone.
If used responsibly, guns serve as a deterrent, and indeed, they would. That's the difference between a gun-free zone and one that isn't. Is presumably there may be guns there that do serve as a deterrent. Even the president has men to protect him with guns. I don't think we can draw a parallel there and make it stick.
I kind of wanted to make just point something out, that you have all these people, they keep saying guns are bad. It's just, guns don't protect people, guns don't save lives, and the hypocrisy is they themselves are being protected by people with guns.
Well, indeed, you were saying that those people who are responsible for making the laws and, in fact, creating laws that deprive others of the ability to protect themselves are themselves immune to the kind of attack that we're afraid of. And so, yes, there is indeed a hypocrisy there. I think that's very well put, and it's exactly the right word, and I would have liked to see you use it in here, the hypocrisy.
I wanted to do that, but because my mom came up to me and she said, you should probably kind of just stay away because in a debate, you can't go calling people hypocrites. I mean, of course, that's what the left does, but they don't know how to debate. The right, you can't go calling names, calling people hypocrites. You just have to prove that.
This is an interesting contention, your characterization of left and right, because if we look far enough and we actually look into it, we find that those assumed distinctions really don't exist to the extent that we think they do. Seriously, for one thing, practically an awful lot of the great debaters are on the left, but there again, that shouldn't necessarily condemn them, nor should the fact that somebody's on the right condemn. But when it comes to belittling someone and flinging about opprobrium and vitriol, that's really that's not inappropriate in a debate. It's just not appropriate to accuse your opponent.
Yes.
Because that's ad hominem argument, and it's really not effective.
That's why I did use it in this case. Yeah. Instead, you have to prove you can't.
Yes, but you're not debating the president.
No.
You're talking about the lawmaker.
Yes.
Not being subject to the law he's making, and that's a very good point.
Yeah. I wrote the last sentence, assuming that the president does have some say in Because the people, the lawmakers, they're on the same side as the president, essentially. So I wrote that assuming the president had some authority. Yeah.
It's this is it's a really interesting question. I want to dash off and play around with it, which we will do as soon as we cover the rest of this. I'm so sorry, we're going to run out of time here. We've got Brian's wonderful thing here on cannabis. Now, you did not take a position on its legalization. You just gave us some very useful information on its constituents and their properties. And I think this is very very useful in debating things. But do we want to debate its legalization? And if indeed we do, I think we have to define the proposition. Are we talking about recreational use? Or are we talking only about medicinal use?
Oh wait, I read over what you wrote, Brian. Are you in the support of the recreational use?
I'm in support of medicinal and recreational use because if it is used correctly, then I do not see a problem with it.
How can it be used correctly in recreational use? I was gonna post an article of how it changes the brain chemistry, but I was thinking.
It would be nice to know more about that. I'm not an expert at all. I'm glad to see the material that you presented. You saw the material that Peter Hitchens presented, and indeed that which he referenced in his presentation, which was largely anecdotal, but again, it maintained that there are some serious dangers. On the other hand, you can come up with hundreds of anecdotal examples in which it didn't. I have a good friend who indulged a good deal at one point. He went on to get 2 doctorates and distinguish himself in a lot of ways. It doesn't necessarily mean that you're not going to go anywhere in life. Let's do this one first and then jump into that. I'm not sure we can restrain ourselves. Use of cannabis dates back, I suggested at least, because we can certainly establish an early usage of it, but it's very hard to prove that there weren't previous ones. And maybe it is. I mean, I don't know where it was
Probably somewhere
propagated.
in Africa or tribes or something. I don't know.
Yeah, yeah.
I don't know where it originates, but around the time I think what time was tobacco discovered?
Tobacco was discovered during the reign of Elizabeth I, which would have been the very end of the 16th century, beginning of the 17th century. So that would have been 100 years previous to this.
Yeah, I probably could have gone back to then. Who knows? There's no document.
Yeah, so it's I really don't know the answer there, but usually if we can establish its use at a specific time, we can assume at least that it's that old.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. It was used as a main ingredient in different ceremonies and rituals alike. The alike didn't work for me there, because usually that's balancing something against another thing. But I'd sure like to know whose ceremonies and rituals are we talking about?
Like ancient tribes and whatnot.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking.
Well,
I mean,
ancient tribes and whatnot
they've been doing
doesn't
that
take us
stuff
that
for
much further
who knows
to.
how long.
Can you give me a continent?
It's like around Africa and the Indian tribes. A lot of them would use it.
Okay, so we're talking about North America and Africa, to which it is indigenous.
Yeah, I guess.
It's indigenous to both continents, because there's an awful lot of things that aren't.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, it might be useful just to know that. Okay. We've got tetrahydrocannabinol, that are known as THC. Normally, the way one does this is you would say delta 9 THC, parenthesis, tetrahydrocannabinol, close parenthesis. You use the acronym expansion right after the first time you use the acronym, and that from that point on, use nothing but the acronym. But you have to make sure to have the acronym expansion in there initially. And I did the same thing down here where you jumped into CBD without an expansion. So I looked it up. Cannabidiol, CBD. And I should have put it as parentheses afterwards. Okay, here I felt no paragraph was appropriate. Now, you tend to produce very short, choppy paragraphs, often consisting of a single sentence each.
It appears much larger on my phone, that's why.
I see. Okay, I can understand that.
It's much larger, smaller screen.
Okay, 3 different breeds. Talk about breeds of dog, but you usually don't talk about breeds of horticultural objects. So I suggested species, subspecies, varieties, cultivars. Do you know what the word taxonomy means?
I've heard it many times, but not too sure.
It's the subdivisions of anything, subcategories of anything. And so, for example, when we're talking about living creatures, it's kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, species, variety. And so we're talking here about species, subspecies, and variety, or cultivar would be a specifically cultivated strain that can be reproduced predictably. And so, indeed, I don't know which of these applies to cannabis, but it'd be better if it's not a breed. Sativa, indica, and hybrid. By hybrid, you mean a hybrid of those two.
Yeah.
I think that would have made it clearer to say a hybrid of the two. Due to its particle agonistic activity. Do you know what agonistic means?
Agonistic. Agonistic. Oh, agony means pain.
Great guess.
Pain.
Great guess. Yeah, agonistic really means competitive, and it actually goes back to the Olympics of ancient Greece. They talked about those agonistic activities, and so that's really the origin of the word in that respect, which I don't think fits here.
Yeah,
I
I
mean,
was reading it later on, and I noticed that because I was reading it loud, and it didn't really fit too well.
So I'm sure we can find something better than that. Also, I like this usage here. It really elevates the level of the sentence a good deal. If we say THC appears to result in greater down regulation of cannabinoid receptors than endocannabinoids. There's nothing wrong with that sentence, but if you put the do in there, this one appears to result in greater something rather than do and endocannabinoids. It raises the level of formality and clarifies what you're talking about a good deal. Okay, it's FFC over. I think FFC in comparison would just sounded better to me there. Exclamation point just means you did something that looked particularly good here. I don't remember what it was. The drug's therapeutic window. That's wonderful. That's wonderful, because there we're talking about the time during which it's useful to take it before the body develops resistance to it, presumably, and that in fact may be longer for certain things, for certain effects than other effects. Very good. Got a subject-verb mismatch there. That need to be eradicated from existence, that deserve to be eradicated, should be adequate. Do you have any questions about my suggestions there? If you were to make all of those little changes and read it through, it might be a really useful way to look at it. Okay. Now we've got guns in America. This one came in. It's nicely. Please note a few things. sentences as of late. I think that's a horrible usage. Now, that's just a matter of opinion. What your mass nouns and count nouns, we'll go through and see that. Please don't use which as relative pronoun for people. The general rule is he is the person who entered the room. We could also say they are the people that entered the room, but they are the people which entered the room. Generally, no, that's reserved for objects, non-sentient things. Okay. You don't use the past tense when narrating a story in the past. There are exceptions to that, but you jumped into present tense when talking about something in the past here, which I thought was a bit awkward. Most of it's very good here. Others, however, strongly disagree. They believe guns are the only tool that can successfully defend citizens from the dangers of criminals in the streets. What you have here, of course, is two completely separate sentences. There's one of them. You've got a comma. The comma is not allowed to separate separate sentences. And then this one is a totally separate sentence. I solved the problem by making them into a single sentence. Others, however, strongly disagree, maintaining that guns are the only tool that can successfully defend. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Now, very often you'll find that if you have a run-on sentence, it just has to be tweaked a little bit so that one half of it is no longer a complete sentence. And we do that by putting in a device like this, which makes the second half of this into a sentence fragment. And that's fine. We can put a sentence fragment together with sentence, and that's perfectly acceptable. Sentence fragment can't be on its own. You can't have two complete sentences on their own. But you can have a complete sentence with any number of sentence fragments attached to it. And that's actually a very good way to write. So maintaining, if you start something with the word maintaining, you know it's not going to be a complete sentence. Okay, well, in fact, the guns have been the hot topic as of late. Okay, with anti-gun group, what the anti-gun group failed to see, I suggested what they overlook, what they ignore, what perhaps they choose to ignore, what they neglect perhaps. Just ideas there. I had a little difficulty with dying at the hands of guns. So just because dying at the hands of something or someone really seems to imply a human being rather than an object. Okay, and here we have the mass noun and count noun problem. Knives and scissors from society because those kill a significant amount of people every year. And you see how amount can never apply to people. Amount of water, amount of oil, amount of rice, amount of cheese, but no, number of people, number of books, number of pencils.
Okay.
Okay, nice one here. Let's see what you did there. That's so good. Right away, you're able to see how absurd this reading is, and the fact that people still use it is quite pitiful. Okay, all of this is just a matter of putting it into past tense instead of having it in present tense here. So that works fine. There's the men and women which resided in the United States. Again, I want to avoid the which, and I said who reside in the United States. Indeed, we're talking about present tense. We are working in present tense. You can see it right now. So we want to make sure that that tense stays consistent. And then a single tooth from a rabid dog. Okay, interesting simile. Nicely done. Any questions at all?
No, I read some of yours, Andrew. I read, I think, about half of it. Yours was mainly covering the statistics, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Did you have any other comments on it, suggestions?
No. I think we should get into the use of marijuana, maybe whether, or an essay on whether or not it is, yeah, I guess you can't drive under the influence. I actually, never mind.
I'm just. Well, I'm not sure where anything is here.
Are you looking for what?
Actually, I was looking for arguments on gun control. Simply because what I did was go through and find a couple of essays.
Mhm.
In this case, they're not videos. I've got some videos there too, which are very good. But in this case, what I did was I took little parts of the essays and highlighted them so that we could find them easily. This is written by Christopher Hitchens. If you take the Second Amendment as a whole, which the National Rifle Association and political conservatives generally do not, it can be understood as enshrining the right, if not indeed the duty, of citizens to defend their country and themselves from aggression, including aggression by the government. The idea of the well-regulated militia arose from a hostility to the monarchistic imposition of a standing army. The time might come when the people might have to muster against the state. Well, what's wrong with that? Okay, this hits the nail right on the head. I've always wondered, why is that point not raised? Because it's so obviously what is meant by the Second Amendment to the Constitution. Does anybody have any thoughts on that?
I think because when most people think of owning a gun, they don't really think of creating a militia to stop the American government.
Yeah, that's what I mentioned, tyranny. Because
Good point. You did. Yeah. No, very, very good point. Another point that has to be brought up is, what did they mean by guns, firearms, when they wrote the Second Amendment?
handguns, rifles.
Well, back then they didn't have it though.
They were talking about the same guns that were used by the military.
Mm-hmm.
They were not making a distinction between this is a military gun and this is a private weapon. They were the same thing, as they were muzzle loading flintlocks. But that distinction has been just torn apart. The guns that you're allowed to own are clearly not the same ones that are used in the military.
Yeah.
So the initial concept itself has already been eroded in many ways. Let's look at the this one. You have to remember, Hitchens. He's the left-hand brother of the two Hitchens brothers, and very left. But as I said, absolutely brilliant in his own way. And he is clearly in favor of or opposed to gun control.
Mm-hmm.
And please read that, because it's fabulous all the way through. This one, Amy Goodman, is also on the left. It took me a long time to find an article that actually supported gun control, which is interesting.
I haven't really read any articles supporting gun control. I've just heard people about it on the news or whatever, and how they kind of they evade the questions that are asked. So I never really get the full picture of their side.
Yeah. There are so many issues involved here, and there really are massive issues. There are a number of programs. You've probably never seen them. There. Sometimes I find myself watching old-fashioned mystery stories, and especially the Midsummer Murders is one that I've followed, which is interesting because you've got all these things happening and people being murdered all over the place, but the police never carry firearms. It's just not part of the culture. Well, I shouldn't say that. There are a lot of firearms because they're talking about out in the countryside and everybody's got a shotgun, but it never really rises. It's a different culture. And it's a culture which, at least in the past, had absolutely no constraints upon ownership and use of firearms. Still doesn't to a large extent. It's just not part of the culture to make a problem.
May I recommend something that, for this week on
Sure.
the topic of gun control? I remember, does any of you know or can recall the Sandy Hook shooting?
It comes up again and again in these articles.
Oh, really? Okay. Well, there's a YouTube clip I saw. It was also on the news. I saw it then, but there's this YouTube clip of. Do you know who Piers? I've actually mentioned this a few weeks ago about Ben Shapiro. Do you know who Piers Morgan is?
Yes.
Yes.
You know, former X Factor coach or judge. There's this video that where Ben Shapiro is debating with Piers Morgan on gun control and the Sandy Hook shooting. I can't exactly recall all of it, but
Can we
it's
find
great.
the link? If we
it's
can, I'll
very
put it up
easy
there.
to find it. If you search Piers Morgan gets owned by Ben Shapiro gun control, you'll find it.
Okay, let's hunt that up and put it up there because I just listened to some of Piers Morgan's material and he does seem to speak quite well. That's important for our purposes.
yes.
We want to make sure to do that.
Yes, Ben Shapiro speaks well as well. Speaks fluent.
Okay, here basically we have the opposite side being presented. And indeed, perhaps it makes sense that if guns simply didn't exist, it might make it a little more difficult for people to kill each other.
Yeah, but
But
once they're in the culture, they're pretty much impossible to take out.
that's a good point because it's part of the culture and because it also, you've got the disparity between those who have them and those who don't. And initially, if you illegalize them, then only criminals are going to have them. That's part of it.
That's what I. Yeah,
And
that's
and
what
then
I
we also
mentioned
have
in my paper.
the question of it's more of a symbolic one because the guns that we're allowed to possess clearly we're totally outgunned by that which the government has at its disposal. But it's more symbolic. It's the fact that in nearly every repressive, despotic country, guns are not allowed. The fact that they are allowed here is perhaps symbolic of the fact that maybe we haven't sunk that low yet. Just thoughts I wanted to throw out before we jump into the thing. Let me just explain who's there. This was on gun control. I repeated this Peter Hitchens. No, we haven't seen that one yet. He speaks about gun control and it does a fine job. This young man does a superb job. I don't even know who he is. It's a testimony in a court, apparently. But go ahead and take a look at that. And indeed, look at these articles and see what you think. If you can help me find more material on the other side of this issue, I'd appreciate it. Because I looked around quite a
Now,
bit.
the Ben Shapiro thing, should I put the links to it, or if we have the time, are we going to go over it in class? I'm not sure.
I would be happy to go over it in class, but I don't think I want to take time right now to put it into the classroom. That would take me close to 10 minutes of fussing.
Yeah, so
Putting this stuff up like this does take time. Okay, let's get ourselves back onto our agenda and see what we want to do with that. I'd like to play around with those a little bit more, but let's just quickly look at the rest of this. This one, I believe you've all seen. I would recommend seeing it again. Just when I listened to it again, I just realized that whatever he is saying, Berlinski, of course, is very iconoclastic. He questions everything. And indeed, he may have a very good point that once the scientific assumptions are established, it's very hard to shift them. As you discovered from listening to that history of our understanding of the atom, every time somebody came up with a new idea, the establishment wouldn't have it, absolutely refused, laughed the person off the stage. And well, I guess there are people who are laughed off the stage who deserve to be, but in so many cases, turned out that person was totally right. Now, he, of course, goes off in a very different direction than most scientists do, but he does it so well that it's worth following. On the other hand, Tyson here, whom I'm sure you watched all 5 hours of this, right?
Not all 5 hours.
No, not all 5.
Really? You mean you didn't do all the homework? Anyway,
Are you kidding me? You know, if I were the teacher, they'd be all over here lined up doing 150 push-ups.
that's not the kind of teacher I am.
Be careful of physical fitness. I mean, they'll be buff when they get out of this class.
Oh, we had a really good article on physical fitness come in here. Very useful.
Good enough.
Yes, this semester.
What does Murray Gell-Mann on creativity have to say about that?
That's he's fascinating. Somebody tell Martin what that interview was all about. This was a celebration of creativity, and a number of top scientists and people from other fields as well were invited to speak. What did he talk about?
He talked about not being limited by the boundaries of science, and just, if I remember correctly, open up your mind, and kind of like how Albert Einstein was disproven, you could always think outside the box and disprove other modern scientists, which is also kind of what Berlinski talked about.
Yeah.
See, the challenge with science today, science used to take a concept and have a hypothesis and prove it right or wrong. Now they're given the result and they're told to find a hypothesis.
There are fundamental assumptions that are being made, and as Gell-Mann puts it very appropriately, most of the time they're there for good reason. And if you question them, you'll discover they're there for good reason. But you have to question them, because that's where the real answers are going to be.
Where I come in now is global warming. They hire scientists to support a preconceived concept.
That's indeed what
that's what he talks about
Berlinski
also.
was talking about.
That's where science is starting to take a political turn to a point where science will lose its respect.
This was a point he made quite a bit, actually, and I think he made it quite well. I think the corollary, however, was not addressed particularly well, and that is, even if we are certain to within 95% that we're right, it's not necessarily a chance we as a people should be taking.
Okay, let's see where that goes. Get that going.
We've got to question all of our assumptions. Remember that line of Douglas Adams? Question everything you see on the internet, except this. Well, I suppose including this. Okay. What does Tyson say? Shall we discuss that next week? It's very good. There's no question. He does speak well, and you'll notice it's unscripted. Has to be unscripted. He's got errors in it, but he does a reasonably decent job. His background is not particularly lofty. He came from a common family, had some opportunities. He was helped along by Carl Sagan. But he has acquired really a wonderful presence and ability to share science in a very understandable form. So I'd like to look at that. Okay, rest of this stuff we've been doing for some time. I'm assuming you're still jumping around and looking at things there. Is there anything there that we want to address? Let's jump back to our debate then.
Belinsky at the beginning, he was talking about the Cambrian fossil and the Cambrian explosion.
Right.
And he made the point that, well, since I've studied this before, that it isn't possible to have a million new species in just 8 million years, right after the Cambrian explosion. Also, midway, he was talking about how he gave an example of a whale. They said that the big whale, that a smaller creature involved into it, the size of a cow or the size of the cervat.
He realized that to be something even smaller.
Yes, and then he said, yeah, smaller. And then he talked about the finch and how through the process of microevolution, with evolution there's two types, micro and macro, but through microevolution, the finches were able to adapt and find food better. Now this is the problem with the evolution argument. They are pushing macroevolution, that one species could evolve into completely something else. You know how they keep saying, and what I'm about to say is actually true. They keep saying how, or implying how we evolved from apes or something that looks like an ape.
Give us a complete sentence. I didn't catch all of that.
Scientists who support macroevolution, if you look at the diagrams, and they're essentially saying how we are evolving, how we evolved from monkeys and how we're genetically related to monkeys and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But we're actually more genetically related to a mouse than we are to an ape. It's actually true. Look it up. We are related genetically more to a mouse than to an ape.
I'd like to look at
And here we have a contradiction in the evolution.
I'd like to look at the genetic evidence there and see exactly what it is, because they talk about the relationship between the human and the chimpanzee as being the closest, and that it's something like 99% of the DNA is identical.
Yes, and for a mouse,
is it even more?
We're 98% identical to the mouse. So there's a big contradiction there. I don't have all the details, but
it would be interesting to look at that. But still, the point that Tyson makes, I think, is fascinating there, and that is we are a DNA-based life form, and indeed we know of no life forms that aren't DNA-based,
Mm-hmm.
which is interesting and a bit depressing in a way. The fact that life doesn't seem to have generated along more than just one path.
Right.
It's only followed that one path. We haven't seen life introduced to our ecosystem through meteorites or anything that has produced a different type of life at all. It's only the one type. And we can see indeed how we are all related and must indeed all have come from the same genetic material somehow or other.
Mm-hmm.
Now, what of course is left out is the concept of design,
yes,
and indeed that's intentionally left out in a way. Now, some of the atheists are extremely strident in their pounding the drum. Because they have the genetic records, and the genetic records tell them something. But if you pin it down, really all they're saying is that uh, Darwinism and natural selection simply shows you that you don't necessarily need to have a God. It doesn't mean that there isn't one. You see what I mean? It gives you the opportunity to say, okay, well, there might be another way that it might have progressed.
Yeah, that's what Darwin mentioned God in his books. But all these atheists, they're so stubborn to leave out intelligent design.
Well,
They're
it's
atheists.
interesting. I think Tyson makes an interesting point there when we talk about intelligence is who are we to define what intelligence is?
Well, we can give examples of intelligence. I can give you an example right now. Let's say you're on the beach and you just see waves coming in and you just see sand just clumped up on the beach, wet a little bit. But now let's say you continue to walk and you find someone wrote Peter plus Jane and they drew a heart around it, or someone wrote a name in the sand. We can conclude from what our knowledge that that came from intelligence.
Indeed, but of course it's very, very hard to ask the real questions because we've all been brought up inside a box, and getting out of those boxes is very difficult. And if we see something like Dick and Jane, certainly we look at that and we really realize that not only is this intelligence, but it's an intelligence that makes sense to us and that we can communicate with. But what Tyson is saying is that may only be one of so many different possible potential intelligences. And if we encountered them, we probably wouldn't even know each other. We wouldn't be able to communicate any more than we can communicate with a mouse or a chimpanzee.
Yeah.
And so we're not perhaps qualified even to say what is intelligence. It may indeed be intelligences involved in all kinds of things, but we as a species are unable to even recognize them.
Do you know the Discovery Institute? They have all these answers to all these questions that are going on in the community and the debates. The Discovery Institute, they're the big, they're the lead in the intelligent design side of the argument. The Discovery Institute is in Seattle, Washington.
Mm-hmm. Well, if there are good presentations, now good, I mean language, then let's go ahead and throw them up there and look at.
I think I could give a name. You could look into him. I'm not sure about this, but his name is Stephen C. Meyer. Stephen C. Meyer.
Okay, suppose you post something
Okay.
in our open forum, and
Okay.
perhaps even a link if you find something
Okay.
good. Okay, so that takes us in some interesting directions, and I think it would be nice to watch Tyson, and then perhaps even question what Tyson has to say in light of what you saw Berlinski talking about. So we play around with it there. He comes up with some really very good questions, and indeed that was something Einstein said, was judge a person not by his answers but by his questions. Okay, so let's in discussing these things, the most important part.
You are going to have the privilege of closing up tonight.
Oh, do I? Okay.
Yes. You have a key?
I do.
Good. All you gotta do is just hit the blue button away.
Okay. Okay, and you've got everything else done. I'll turn
Everything
off the
else is
lights on. Okay.
The lights you gotta turn off are those right there on the way out.
Okay.
Do you want those lights on? Right now?
Right now I think we need them, yeah.
And the switch is right behind that wall.
Okay.
Have a good time?
You too.
Yes. And happy Green Apollos.
Thank you, indeed.
We're off to the opera.
Oh,
Moby Dick.
goodness.
Yeah. Yes, so that's our goal for the night.
Enjoy your Ahabian.
We will do that.
No, are we?
Bye, kid.
Actually, never
Bye-bye.
mind. Continue.
Bye.
Bye. Take care.
Okay, Let's figure out where we are here. I'm sorry, the time goes by so rapidly, and there's so many different things that are fascinating to discuss. But let's go ahead and discuss. Remember, when we're discussing, keep the formality level on a level with what you would want to write and to turn in, realizing how it's going to be subjected to all kinds of criticism and correction.
How do you ever? Now I know at the start you were looking at our papers and seeing for plagiarism. You couldn't find any, but do you still do that?
Looking for what?
Plagiarism. No, I'm just curious. Do you still do that?
Looking for what?
Plagiarism.
Plagiarism.
Do you still do that?
Not really.
Something with that
I've
many
ended up
errors.
doing it just a few times because I found students are often unable to realize how good writing is. And then when they give me a chunk of writing and I look at it, I can see how good it is. I say, well, if this is really belongs to this student, we've got something remarkable going on. But it ends up being Shel Silverstein or something from somewhere else. It's simply because I see something quite remarkable going through. Okay, I think the marijuana one is the interesting one. Let's wind up with some discussion of that. If I may just start it out, one of the points that I really feel is ignored in most of these debates is not whether something is right or wrong, but whether we want to grant the government control over it, which is a different question. And that applies to gun control, that applies, yeah, and I mean, as it is, a government control is something that so many people are uncomfortable with. On the other hand, we're perfectly happy granting government control over relationships, types of relationships, reproduction, birth, death. We give them willingly control over all those things. Do we really want to do that? No. That is one of the questions too. And we may be opposed to various different practices, but does that necessarily mean that that we want to have government control of them? And this is another one I think that falls into that category. You may feel that it's terribly wrong, that indeed it's dangerous, and that indeed perhaps it's not even a good thing socially to have something prevalent like that. But do we really feel that it's appropriate to make it illegal? And the big question, of course, is when we look at marijuana is, can you think of any good therapeutic uses for alcohol?
Yeah,
No.
that's what I don't like. Everybody's always comparing marijuana with alcohol. They're two different things.
They are indeed two different things, but alcohol is simply the recreational drug of choice that's part of our tradition. I quote George Bernard Shaw in Pygmalion, in which Colonel Pickering offers Higgins a glass of port, and Higgins turns it down, and Pickering says, "It's positively uncivilized not to need a glass of port at a time like this." This is the role that alcohol tends to play, and you won't find any lawmakers, practically none, who don't indulge in that particular recreational drug. Would somebody like to speak in favor of legalization of marijuana?
I really don't know what to write about it other than just statistics or something. I really think we had something to write about on the gun laws and stuff, but the marijuana, I don't know what to write.
I think there are some things that we can say about it, though.
Sure,
Brian, do you have some thoughts on that? You gave us a bunch of good scientific material,
I think marijuana is very overlooked in the fact that it's illegal and people look at it as something, as another illegal drug. Like they compare it to like cocaine or any of the other big drugs. And in reality, marijuana is, I've never actually heard of a death caused by marijuana, but there's at least thousands of people every year who die from alcohol. And the only requirement for alcohol is you have to be 21. Anybody can do it.
Mhm.
You know,
Alcohol certainly has some serious dangers. Some people are susceptible and just really go down the tubes when they get onto it. Other people manage to use it responsibly and reasonably for a lifetime. So it's hard. Are there similar problems with marijuana? Are you aware of?
I've never tried it, so I don't know the effects of it, but from what I've heard and researched, recreational use is, even if there's no like medicinal problems with somebody, recreational use can aid somebody like a lot, because stress buildup and pain, even, you don't have to have a medical problem to have back pain or anything, but that could still aid to it.
Actually, yeah, I know what to write about. I don't know what you're gonna write about, but I'm gonna write against the legalization of it.
Okay. Well,
This will be
let's do some real
interesting.
research
Yeah.
and see what we can find. This is a really heavily laden issue.
Yeah, even the top officials are.
And unfortunately, it does sound to me as though most people who jump into research onto the subject have preconceptions about what they want to find, and on both sides of it. And so I'm not sure that I have any answers. I have no direct experience with it myself. Though, as I said, I know people who have who've used it without ill effect, as far as I can tell. But certainly some arguments can be made for its therapeutic effect. And one thing it's apparently good for is glaucoma. It's also very good for dealing with certain types of pain. Again, I'm not an expert on that, but apparently there are good reasons to consider it there, and reasons perhaps not to deny it to people who are suffering from some syndrome that it has been proven to help. Any thoughts?
I feel like I'd have to research it more, but I'll probably. I think I'm leaning more towards the legalization of it.
I've noticed also the war on drugs, marijuana at least, it would be completely diminished, because once cartels and stuff are moving all of that weight into different countries and whatnot, that will slowly stop when it's legalized, and they'll soon realize, wait, what else do we have? Like, obviously cocaine and everything else, heroin, they can still do that, but I mean, it's a plant.
So you feel that perhaps
Cocaine comes from the. Cocaine comes from the
See,
plant.
it's extracted.
Yeah.
It's extracted. Marijuana in itself is naturally it grows as a bud form, and that is what it is. Like, there's no extracting to it. There's no.
Yeah, I kind of feel like it could be put into the same group as smoking in general.
smoking is diminishing in popularity.
Yeah.
Yes. Everybody's trying to switch to e-cigs
Yeah.
and get off of it.
You know, I hate to say it, but I always come down to the same thing when looking at almost all of these: is the answer is education.
Yeah.
The answer is a real concerted effort to find out what's really going on, and not just accept that which is generally expected and generally recognized, and so see what's really happening without preconceptions. Trouble is when we come across issues like this, which are so laden with preconceptions, it's very, very hard to do any serious study. Have any of you come across a film or heard about it called Reefer Madness?
Yes, I've heard of it.
Have you?
I've not seen
No,
it. but
never
I've
heard of it.
I've seen little bits of it, but I mean, it was clearly an effort to vilify marijuana thoroughly, and it was so full of mistakes and erroneous assumptions that it discredited those who launched into it with that objective, really.
No, I know the oratory, we weren't able to have one on gun control because there is no opposing
Yeah,
view this
we all
time.
agree.
But maybe we could have it on marijuana next week. I'm not sure, or in the future, because we will have opposing views this time.
Okay, that's fine. And if we want to actually have a debate,
Yes.
perhaps we should look at some serious debates that have taken place online. Now, we've got a couple of videos to look at. But debate is an interesting thing. You want to have a structure. We'll have a very simplified structure: pro, con, redirect, and then conclusion. So the two sides will alternate. And the way debates are judged is very complex, and I don't know, we don't necessarily want to go into keeping track of all of the little points that were made and whether they were refuted or not, because that doesn't necessarily lend itself to good oratory either. But let's have a very simple debate format. Would
Okay.
you like to take the pro-gun control? Oh, no, that, okay. We've left the gun control behind
Yes.
because nobody's interested enough. Would you like to take the anti marijuana legalization?
Happily.
But the question is, how are we going to form the proposition? Are we talking about both medicinal and recreational use?
I think we should talk about recreational. Clearly, people with severe, because not all meds, pharmaceutical meds are going to cover. I really think we should cover probably strictly recreational, maybe address one topic at a time, because when you jumble the two together, it can get chaotic.
Very, very nicely put. Very nicely put. It will probably be chaotic anyway. but let's see what we can do with that. I think that's fine.
Okay.
So you are already admitting perhaps that there may be justification for the medicinal use.
Yeah, but I think we should target the recreational use this week. Because Brian, didn't you already cover medicinal use?
I didn't cover too much about recreational / medicinal use. I'm more covering the chemical compounds and
Okay.
structure and
Okay.
Yeah, you talked about the chemical compound that is significant in recreational use, and the fact that there are other compounds that are useful medicinally that don't have any recreational
No.
use.
I'm not sure if do we want to cite our sources at the end. I mean, that just came to me. Like, I don't know why we would, but just put where we got the information from.
Oh,
I don't
absolutely.
know. Okay.
No, it would be worth putting together. Now, we haven't talked a lot about research projects, and we can, if you'd like, specifically when you're researching something, you need to find your source, and if you're going to hand in a research paper, it has to follow a very strict format. And the fact that it has to follow that format means really it's not something that you should necessarily do. We need to find a good tool to do it. I believe I have a good one posted in the
Maybe should we keep it essay format? Because
Let's
I mean
keep it
that's
as
what
an
we
essay
did the
format for the
gun
time
law
being.
thing. That turned out fine, in my opinion.
We'll keep it in essay format for the time being. But I do think we should look at writing research papers in the future, and perhaps the best way to do that is to read some scholarly journal papers.
Yeah.
There are some good ones. There's in fact one wonderful scholarly journal called the Journal of Unschooling and Alternative Learning, which has some wonderful material in it. And I think it might even be useful to submit something to them. Because as homeschoolers, we have a body of people that we can give questionnaires to and do some statistical analysis with, and we might have something to contribute.
Yep.
So let's think about that for next time.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay, we're already running over. I apologize. Have a good week, folks.
Thanks.
We'll see you next week.
Thank you.
Have a fun week.
Oh, yeah, that's this week, right?
Yes.
Saturday.
Halloween.